ready then, I invite the Prime Minister to open up this debate. Here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for calling me up here. Members of this most august panel, I can't say how honored I am to be here at National Semifinals, meeting true friends on side opposition, who I think are probably my closest friends on the circuit, especially to be here with Greg. It's been a true honor to debate with you over the last 4 years. So our case is constitutional law. That might piss some of you off, but we think it's a pretty good case, and we think that it actually deals with some of the most fundamental issues in our democracy. What we're going to say, what our case is that as a matter of constitutional law, Roe versus Wade was wrongly decided. Any questions? No, that's not. It was wrongly decided. Sure. So Roe legalized abortions during the first trimester of pregnancy. It permitted health and safety regulations on abortions during the second trimester. And in the third trimester, it basically allowed states to regulate abortion. The basic finding was that Excellent. So, our first independent point is about the role of the judiciary. We recognize that an analysis of whether or not the Supreme Court's decisions were right or wrong must begin with a rightful examination of what the role of the Supreme Court must be within our democracy. To begin with, the Supreme Court, when exercising the power that it did in Roe v. Wade, is exercising the greatest power that the Supreme Court could possibly exercise. It's choosing not only to overrule the democratic will of the state that passed this abortion law, but in addition, it overrules the prospective future democratic will of any state that tries to regulate abortion in this way, in any way. And we think that that's pretty serious. But more importantly, it does so in a way that leaves no opportunity for majoritarian correction by any other lawmaking process. So, since we generally think that democratic decisions are good decisions and better than autocratic decisions made by the few, we think that the court's use of this type of extreme power must be limited to the following circumstances. We think that when laws passed by legislatures violate norms that are stated or clearly implicit in the written Constitution, courts are empowered to strike them down because a greater, more substantial majority essentially permanently exercises will by placing those protections in the Constitution. But that's clearly not the case here because the Constitution says nothing about abortion, and we'll make more constitutional arguments to that effect later in our case. But second of all, we recognize that certain times the court does provide extraordinary protection beyond what the Constitution immediately writes or is immediately implicit. What we would tell you is the only time in which the court is legitimate in doing so, given that it's exercising this anti-democratic power, is when the court is using this power in order to protect minorities from subordination within the political process or to correct a defection within the democratic process that stops it from functioning. We do this because laws that discriminate against these certain groups might stop the democratic processes of the Constitution itself and thus make the Constitution essentially meaningless and therefore unimportant. But in addition, what we would tell you is that in these instances, restricting democracy in the short term promotes democracy in the long term, which is what makes it permitted. Our second independent point is about that standard, about political malfunction, and why we don't think that the case of abortion regulation was a substantial enough political malfunction or defect in democracy to justify the court's anti-democratic power. Now, we agree that there seems to be this extra consideration for those who are discriminated against. But when the Supreme Court is intervening to stop discrimination, we think that it does so to prevent one group from being subordinated to a more powerful group within society. What we would tell you is that laws which restrict abortion do not subordinate women to men, but instead protect the rights of fetuses and subordinate some women and promote the interests of fetuses versus the interests of women. The reason why we think that this is not a political malfunction is that while women are somewhat underrepresented, especially during this time when this decision was made, at the same time, fetuses have no political representation and have no ability to affect the political process. But what's more, what we would tell you is that what's at stake for these fetuses is their lives, the potential life of a human being, a very real concern that in the protection of rights, we think that it is permissible in order to make these types of laws. Sure.
Is it constitutional for the government to ban birth control and other contraceptives?
That's a very good question. I was going to get to this idea of right to privacy. So, we think that it's wrong for the Supreme Court to violate to ban the use of contraceptions, because when you ban the use of contraceptions, the only way you can enforce that is by going into people's bedrooms and invading their privacy in an extreme way. We don't think the Constitution, however, guarantees an absolute right to buy things like contraception, when it certainly certainly doesn't have an absolute right to buy other drugs, drugs that are currently illegal, or any other types of other commercial transactions that we participate in our society. The third independent point we want to make is why we don't think that there's a rights claim here, and therefore we don't think that the Supreme Court should have stepped in and claimed that there was a right to an abortion. Recognize that what the Supreme Court did here was very extreme. First of all, they asserted that there's a general right to privacy that deserves this extra special protection, above and beyond the notion that people can't be banned from using contraception. Second of all, they put this protection beyond the requirement that government regulations merely be rational or connected to some legitimate interest, but instead require that a compelling state interest be provided before abortion can be regulated. And finally, what they decided was that this right to privacy extends the decision of having an abortion or terminating a pregnancy, which we think is also a step beyond any inference you could make from the Constitution. So the first argument here is that we don't think that the right to privacy which the Supreme Court is asserting, it should be this broad. Recognize that even if you think that the Supreme Court recognized this right at its numbers within the Constitution, like the First Amendment's ban against knowing the political associations of government knowing your political associations, or the Fifth Amendment's privilege against self-incrimination, or the Fourth Amendment's prohibition on unreasonable searches and seizures, we think that all of these principles, while they amount to a sense of privacy, only amount to a sense of privacy in as much as they restrict the ways that government can collect information about the individual. When the government is deciding whether or not it can search you, when the government is deciding whether or not it can make you speak when you don't want to, it's about the information that it's asking of you, not the decisions that you make. Why do we think this is particularly compelling? Because the harms of an abortion regulation are its privacy harms. We recognize that women face serious harms if they can't have an abortion. And personally, public policy-wise, I think that abortion should be legal. But it can go a long way towards ruining a woman's life if she has a child that she doesn't want. However, we don't think that this is a violation of their privacy, just a stunting of their life choices. And we don't think that a stunting of your life choices is a violation of liberty that the Supreme Court should be intervening in. Laws against soft drugs, for example, laws that prevent you from committing suicide, all of these laws intervene in your personal choices. We say that they restrict your liberty, but not your privacy, and it would be wrong to extend a right of privacy to these cases. But the third thing that we would tell you is, asserting a principle that the government can't interfere with the individual is far too over-inclusive. Recognize that all of the Supreme Court's decisions involve some regulation that interferes with the individual lives of a person versus the power of a state. In order to actually enforce such a right, you would have to draw some right line and tell us why this violation of liberty is more important than others, even given that there's a life in the balance, or at the very least a potential life in the balance. But on top of that, what we would tell you is that the Supreme Court explicitly rejects this justification when they allow abortion regulations that are aimed at the health or safety of women. Those regulations are paternalistic. They decide for women what types of health risks or safety risks they should be allowed to take. If these paternalistic regulations are permissible, why isn't it permissible to be paternalistic in the realm of whether or not you have an abortion in the first place? But finally, what we would tell you is, even if this is a constitutional right, we think it should be balanced against the compelling state interest of potential future life. We tell you that governments can ban the killing of dogs, even in the exercise of constitutional rights, or even ban the burning of draft cards, even in the exercise of constitutional rights, yet it is still permitted. We are proud to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech. In that case, I call upon the leader of opposition to open the case from the opposition side.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colonel and I are extraordinarily honored to have debated in national semifinals. That said, I want to start with a POI that Colonel asked, because I think it's really damning for side government. Here's the thing. You have to remember that when this case was handed down, it was in the immediate aftermath of Griswold v. Connecticut. And what did Griswold v. Connecticut establish? It established a right to privacy. So given we have all this standing precedent for expanding sexual rights and expanding bodily autonomy in society, I think it's entirely in keeping with Supreme Court precedent. And that's what our first argument. So our first argument is we think abortion is protected due to the rights of privacy within the Constitution. So we tell you, Mr. Speaker, the right to privacy can be found in the Third Amendment, which prevents soldiers from being quartered in houses. The Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable search and seizure. And the Ninth Amendment, which says that the government ought not constrain rights, even if they are not enumerated specifically within the Constitution. So their standard that they give you on case is absurd. We don't have a right to privacy to keep the government from gathering information from us. In that case, we wouldn't have the Third Amendment. We wouldn't have that textual hook to get privacy. The reason why we established privacy rights is because we think there is fundamentally something intrusive about the government coming into your home, coming in, and regulating your medical decisions. We think that there is a substantive due process claim here insofar as women ought to be able to exercise bodily autonomy over themselves. We also tell you that bodily autonomy is a facilitative right, and you need to have this bodily autonomy in order to exercise your other rights within the Constitution. Look, women need to be able to control their own medical decisions in order to be equal players in the workplace, in the political realm, and in other aspects of society. Given that this burden only falls on women, we think it poses an undue burden on females. That leads me to our second argument, how abortion uniquely poses, or not having abortion, uniquely poses a harm to females. So recognize this procedure. Abortion is a medical procedure that can only fall on men, or only fall on women. So all these arguments they give you on case where they're like, there's no political group that's being subordinated. It's like women have equal say. Okay, this is 1973. Women don't have the equal political influence as men, and historically they have been discriminated against. I don't know if these guys remember, but there was a time in our nation's history when women could not vote. I think that entitles them to some additional constitutional protections. But we also tell you this burden only applies to women insofar as it affects their health. Look, pregnancy is extraordinarily dangerous, and we think a woman ought to be able to have a right to an abortion if she will die, or the fetus will die if she doesn't get this medical procedure. But we also think women have this right to abortion insofar as an undue burden might be placed on them due to rape. We think women have an affirmative defense against a fetus that has been placed in their body without their consent. And we also think this is the case because there's no countervailing interest to weigh against this undue burden, which brings me to my third argument, that fetuses ought not be granted person rights. Look, Mr. Speaker, we think the bright line is when the fetus is viable outside of the body. That is the standard that Roe v. Wade gave us. Why do we think this is the case? Because before the fetus is viable outside of the body, it is necessarily dependent on the woman for its survival. So we tell you, just as how if somebody kidnapped you and locked you in a basement for 9 months and constrained your bodily liberty, you have the right to kill the person who is locking you in this basement. You ought to have the right to intervene against this fetus. Look, if the fetus can be removed from your body and is viable outside of your body, that's fine. We're okay with some restrictions of abortion there. But that's where we're going to draw the white line. Also, we don't think fetuses should be regarded as natural persons insofar as we don't give them political rights. We don't count them in the census. We don't think they're citizens. Look, fetuses are not part of the moral consensus from which we build our democracy. We don't think they should be constitutionally protected. Sure.
Prior to viability, fetuses can feel pain, have consciousness, and have fully formed organs and features. What makes you think that they're not deserving of any right to life?
So this actually isn't true. When the Supreme Court wrote this decision, they went to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and they got a lot of medical information about when the fetus is viable and when you establish this pain threshold. So I don't think this argument is true on faith. But even if you buy it, recognize we can weigh the rights of a sentient being who is able to have hopes, dreams, desires, and goals over something else. Look, if a cat was imprisoning you in a basement, we think it would be appropriate to kill the cat. It has only derivative rights. We don't expect it to So the fourth argument that you would is one of precedent and originalism. Look, if they want to adopt this very strict, only enumerated constitutional rights standard, there's a problem for them. Because at our nation's founding, abortion was legal. We didn't consider a fetus to be a human being until quickening. That is, when the fetus began moving inside the woman's womb. Given that this is a constitutional standard, if you want to use a strictly, purely framers' intent perspective, we don't think that there's an originalist hook to criminalize abortion. Okay. So let's go case side. The first argument they give you is about the role of judiciary and about how we should prevent future generations from making this decision, how this is really oppressive for democratic rights. There's a big problem with this argument. This is an argument against the Supreme Court ever extending fundamental rights. Look, when the Supreme Court, I hope someday, says that gay marriage is a fundamental right, that will constrain the ability of the people in Alabama to criminalize gay marriage. It's true. But we still think, insofar as it's a fundamental right, given that these homosexual couples ought to enjoy the full rights of everyone else, just how we think women ought to enjoy the right to control their own bodily liberty. This doesn't seem to be a problem. At the point where you're willing to waive rights only based on what the majority says, this contravenes all our democratic principles. This is why we have the Supreme Court to begin with, because we want the Supreme Court to check against the will of the majority and to protect individual rights. That's what our people have voted for, and that's the government we choose to keep around. Look, they say the only times when the democracy can restrict rights is when something fundamental is at stake. I think I've proved off case that there is a fundamental right to abortion for all the constitutional allowances I gave you. So their second argument is about how the Supreme Court should only be able to prevent one group from subordinating another. I don't think this is how fundamental rights work. Look, even if the majority is deciding to strip rights away from itself, I don't think we would be comfortable with that. Also, we think women could be subordinated. Look, at this point in American history, they had not enjoyed a wide sweep of civil or political rights. They only enjoyed the right to vote for 50 years. I don't think it's appropriate to say that they were on an equal footing with men. Also, insofar as the medical procedure only affects women, and men are legislating on it and try to constrain their bodily liberty, we think they ought to enjoy the right to defend themselves. And then they tell us fetuses are natural persons. Now that's interesting. I guess when we do our congressional redistricting this year, we include all the fetuses across the United States. No, this is not true. Fetuses are the ball of cells. It's like, just because they have potentiality doesn't mean it's life. Like, they're standing on their side of the house. They say they're opposed to criminalizing contraceptives. Look, contraceptives stop natural life from occurring. They're the but-born cause that prevents a baby from being born. They need to draw you a clear, bright line between these two cases. The final argument they give you is about how the government ought not respect the right to privacy, and the government should only respect the right to privacy when we'd be taking information in order to check personal information. Look, I told you off case that's not the way the right to privacy works. The right to privacy doesn't just prevent the government from stripping personal information from you, but it prevents the government from intervening in your personal sphere over which the government ought not have any jurisdiction. We think the bedroom and the doctor's office ought to be constitutionally protected, given that these areas are necessary in order for the woman to enjoy equal rights. And the final argument they give you is about how life is in the balance, we ought to prioritize fetuses. Cross-apply all my arguments to my third point about how we don't think they're natural persons. He says, if our side of the house is comfortable with some abortion regulations, we ought to be comfortable with a complete ban. No, our standard, as was the standard in Roe v. Wade, is viability. When you can remove the fetus from the woman's body, there is a reasonable way for it to not infringe on her bodily liberty. But when infringing on her bodily liberty is a necessary part of this existence, she can protect herself.
For that speech, they call on the member of government to reconstruct the government case.
The fundamental question in this round is how do we balance these rights? As we tell you, the fetus has at least some right to life, and the finding in Roe v. Wade certainly believed this, because first, Roe v. Wade never protected any sort of constitutional or fundamental right to abortion. All Roe v. Wade protected was a right to privacy. But second, there is also the fetus's right to life. It is a potential person, and in some senses is a person. The bright line that they draw on viability is problematic insofar as it is just arbitrary. It is enshrining the judge's values as to when life begins in the Constitution. But this is nowhere in the Constitution, and indeed, I would say they cannot glean this from any sort of reasonable scientific evidence. I think that it is just an arbitrary standard, and therefore, because it's an arbitrary standard, we need to defer to democracy in order to allow democracy to define these standards instead of arbitrary decisions by judges. Okay, the first thing that they talk about is this right to privacy. And they tell you this right to privacy comes out of the Constitution. And sure, the right to privacy does exist in the Constitution, but it does not apply to this case. As Alex tells you, all the right to privacy protects is the government's ability to gather information. The response to this is no. Well, the Third Amendment protects soldiers from being quartered in your house. How is this privacy? This is the government seizing your land. These are two entirely separate issues, and they cannot be any constitutional basis from this. But, moreover, then they talk about how we need to protect the right to bodily autonomy. First off, they provide you no mechanism to weigh this standard against the rights of the fetus. The problem with this is that Roe v. Wade actually did this and did actually limit bodily autonomy and allowed for paternalist laws protecting the health and welfare of the fetus in the second trimester. unwilling to provide any sort of standard with which we can weigh bodily autonomy, they've already lost the round because they've proven that Roe v. Wade was not broad enough. But moreover, I think that they need to weigh this against the fetus's right to life, which I don't think they've ever actually denied in this round. Then they talk about how this impinges upon women. I have a number of responses. The first response that we have is that the burden of custody does not fall solely to women, it can also fall to men. But second, if we look at why we criminalize abortion, it's not to discriminate against women, but instead to protect the fetus from being killed. But third, because this is not a discriminatory law, it only applies to women specifically because of biological imperatives. We allow separate bathrooms for sexes, but the court can intervene when there are separate bathrooms for races because that is a specifically discriminatory law. This is when the court can intervene on discrimination, when you discriminate for the purpose of discrimination, not because of some arbitrary characteristic that just forces it to be that way. But moreover, what we would tell you here is that, we have, I think those are the sufficient responses to beat this point. Yeah. I mean, seriously, they don't really have much more here. They tell you additionally but additionally, I would think that this does not actually I would believe, Okay. So, but the problem here is that they still discriminate against women on their side of the house by allowing for these paternalistic laws. And therefore, they still lose the round in such that they've given you no standard to adjudicate where these rights lie. And finally, even if these rights do exist, we need to weigh these against the fetus's right to life. Then they tell you that they draw this bright line and its viability. Yeah.
Would it be constitutional to criminalize abortion in cases of rape and incest?
Well, I think that it would be constitutional to criminalize that, in such as, like, we can criminalize all abortion if Roe v. Wade is gone. That is what side we're defending here. But furthermore, I think what the problem that you're facing here is that even though the woman's right has been violated here to her bodily autonomy, we need to weigh that against the right to life. The right to life is the most important right because without the right to life, you have no other rights. They do not exist. Therefore, we ought err on the side of life in all of these circumstances because it is the only standard without which all other rights can exist. Then they talk about how the bright line needs to be viability. Well, first, quickening, as they say in the next independent point, the standard at the time of the founders, happens long before viability. This is a problem for them in such as they have to defend an actual constitutional position here, and the founders certainly felt that it was constitutional to ban abortion long before the bright line that the Supreme Court draws. But second, you can cross-apply all the responses that I already made to this before. There's no specific reason to believe that viability is a very good standard to operate upon here. It is merely the will of the judges, and we ought not urge that. The final thing that they talk about is precedent and originalism. I've already talked about this. This is way before viability. The first thing that we talk about is the role of the judiciary, and how the judiciary needs to err against extending democratic will, against extending rights unjustly, extending rights that do not exist in the Constitution. They say this is an argument against ever extending rights. First off, no, this is an argument against ever creating new rights that do not exist in the Constitution. Our bright line for when we can defend rights is, are they in the Constitution? If not, then no. The second response that we have here is that they need to prove that there's actually a right that they have to defend here because we have to weigh the right to life against all of these other rights. And I told you we always err on the right to life. Then they talk about how that we only weigh these rights that the majority decides upon. But this is just a straw man of our argument. We don't say that we defer to the majority in all cases of rights. We say specifically that we defer to the Constitution in these cases, and then the majority can decide upon the values that society has that are not incorporated in the Constitution. Then they talk about the fundamental right to abort. There is no fundamental right to abort in the Constitution. That is not what we are talking about. They talk about how this protects women. I've already responded to this on the other side of the case. But then they talk about how fetuses are just balls of cells. Well, I mean, I'm just a misshapen ball of cells. where does this begin? I don't think that you can draw a bright line here without just intervening. Then they talk about how they constitutionally protect the right to life. But what we need to do here is that we need to weigh the right to life that the fetus has against all of these rights that women have, and I think we always need to err on the side of the fetus. We talk about how this is not a rights claim. They talk about how this is the bedroom and the doctor's office need to be constitutionally protected areas. Well, we don't protect the doctor's office. They don't protect the doctor's office specifically on their side of the house because they allow paternalistic laws. But furthermore, what we tell you is this is not the reasons that this is not a rights claim are because of all of the other things that we've already talked about in this round. Because this is not actually protected under the right to privacy. Because this is not actually protecting abuse from the government. Because this is not actually protecting any sort of right that's enumerated in the Constitution. Because of that, this is not an accurate rights claim that we specifically need to defend. Then we talk about weighing rights. The final thing that we talk about is we need to draw this bright line in order to balance rights. We draw that bright line for you on our side of the house. We need to err two rights enumerated in the Constitution first, and second, we err on the side of the right to life. We don't believe that viability is an accurate standard that they can use on their side of the house. We're very proud of the votes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be in national semifinals. So Greg does a lot of yelling, but he doesn't actually make good arguments. And I want to address them very clearly, because I think they take an awful position in this round. I think it's very clear. So they say that the right of life of the fetus always trumps. Interesting that in PMC, Alex told you that they would allow contraceptives. Here's why this is damning for them. We clearly explained to you that contraceptives effectively end the right to life of the fetus and prevent this overall. That'll be a way out. But the second problem for them is they take this absurd hardline statement like, yes, we would criminalize all abortion whatsoever, even in cases of rape, even in cases of like a 99% chance that the mother will die. Because guess what? The fetus's right to life is still like 1% is still meaningful. So look, Trinh told you very clearly. First of all, viability is the only standard that you can have in this round. It's the only way you can actually adjudicate this. Greg's like, no. Because the originalist standpoint is like when the fetus can move inside the womb. Interesting. That this is after the viability point of Roe. So it's a huge contradiction for them. But instead, their view of bodily autonomy and their view of bodily liberty is completely incoherent. But the second problem I think they have is they're like, look, these rights aren't in the Constitution. So Trinh told you very clearly that the Ninth Amendment does say that unenumerated rights are protected. So like, is the Ninth Amendment like non-existent for them? If they want to take this absurd textual standpoint, they're like, we're going to take all the Constitution except number 9. We don't know why, but we just don't like that one. Like, what the hell is their textual standpoint? Moreover, it's like, how did they adjudicate the Ninth Amendment on their side of the house? They gave you no clear standard for that. We gave you a lot, essentially the spirit of the document. I think that's why our philosophy is better than this. So they can't just respond to all of our arguments saying, it's not a right, it's not right there, because Trinh 1 told you that it was a viable right, and 2 showed that how can they adjudicate in these cases? No. So what's the first thing we told you? Trinh told you that essentially you need to value this and extend the precedent of the Griswold v. Connecticut. So Greg doesn't really respond to this argument. I think it's really damning for them. And this is where they lose the round already. Because when Greg drops this argument and Trinh says it's the logical progression of bodily autonomy under Griswold, they can't come back with this. Alex can't respond to this in PMR. This literally means that if you follow precedent, which Greg didn't say you shouldn't do, right? Greg never made an argument about this. This means that you have to go to this argument and then defeat this literally, this is the logical extension. No. But what he really says is like, well, how do we balance rights? He asked us for this standard. Now, maybe if we didn't get a standard, this would have been a good thing. But Trinh told you at the bottom of LOC, our standard is viability. And then after viability, if you look at Roe exactly, the decision does balance rights exactly. So that's all we're talking about here. So the first thing we told you, Trinh gave you a ton of arguments about why abortion ought to be preserved through privacy. So what does Greg say? The first thing he says is like, no. Privacy only protects the government's ability to gather information. Because otherwise soldiers might seize your land. It's like, one, how the hell does that fall under their standards for saying the government's like gathering information by seizing? It's like, what's this graph doing here? We need more information about that. Like, what the hell is their standard for this? But moreover, I think Trinh actually articulated to you why it's important that we have this medical privacy and why you need it. But Greg doesn't respond to this at all whatsoever. We defeat their privacy claim and have an accurate interpretation of what privacy means. Give you a fundamental right. They say you can enforce these fundamental rights. We win the round even under their philosophy. That's damning for them. But moreover, Trinh gave you a lot of other analysis which they didn't touch on. He told you that substantive due process applies to this bodily autonomy. No response on their side of the house. They can say all they want about it. Maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe it does, but that didn't come out of Greg's mouth. No, you aren't going to get a chance to respond to that. What else did he tell you? Finally, Trinh told you that there's a facilitative right to control this. Again, no response from Greg. This is really damning because even if they want to say you should only protect political rights in certain circumstances, Trinh explained to you why this does this, why it harms women specifically, and why it holds them back in the political process. They needed to hit these arguments because otherwise they would have held their own. But what does he really tell you? He says like, no, there's a right to life, there's a right to life, there's a right to life, there's a right to life. Doesn't warrant this argument whatsoever, doesn't say why there is a right to life. We gave you a clear standard on this. Our first argument extends through. What's the second thing we told you? We said there's an undue burden on women. So all he says is like, this doesn't just fall on women. Like, I think Greg's pretty smart, but I don't know how he thinks that a man can get an abortion. I tried twice. I wasn't able to get one. They turned me away the second time. Apparently, I'm male. So apparently, facts aren't on their side of the house either. But I'll give this argument a little bit better of a light. So what he's trying to say here is essentially the political and moral consensus of this is really what's relevant. He says like you want to protect the fetus by doing this and protect the right to life. So we said that there isn't a right to life under this circumstance because the woman's rights claim trumps this whatsoever. The fetus has no rights claim under this, and we gave you the standard of viability. That's when we say the right to begin. They didn't contradict this. But Trinh gave you a lot of other analysis into this. He said, look, this is a medical procedure that you don't want the government interfering in. No response here. This is really important because when we say that medical privacy should extend here, because it is an undue burden on women, they need to respond to it. Finally, Trinh told you it's really important to do this when we're talking about the health of the women, defense and rape, and how the women are protecting themselves against this. All he says is like, no, you can still discriminate against blacks because there's no biological difference between blacks and whites. It's like, if their standard for discrimination is biological, that's what Greg said. He said that their standard is biological discrimination. It's like, back to biology, this is their standard. I don't understand what they're saying here. I don't even think Alex understands it. Our third argument is very clear. He said that fetuses, so we said that fetuses are only viable, our standard is fetuses are viable outside the body. So he tries to point us out in this contradiction. He's like, no, because in your fourth argument, you say this thing that's before that. Like, no, the viability standard, just it's a medical fact, is before the wickening period. Trinh told you that very clearly. So I don't think he gets us in this double-line contradiction. But Trinh gave you a lot of other analysis. He told you very clearly, fetuses aren't citizens. It's like, how can they adjudicate these rights if we don't declare them as citizens? From a clear textual standpoint, like, founders probably would have said, count people who may or may not be miscarriage in the future under the census and under political representations. Like, they thought of slaves. I think they could have thought of something else for other individuals. They chose not to. So maybe this isn't the best analysis, but Trinh extended this by saying there are only certain derivative rights, and these don't trump the right to medical privacy that women have. All Greg says in response to this is, no, it's just the will of judges who just really want to protect rights. These judges are so evil, they're like, oh my God, what are we going to do about this? That's not an argument against what Trinh told you. Trinh told you very clearly that this is a question of medical certainty, and that's how we determine viability. It's not like the judge is like, oh, I feel like medical viability is here. They do it like amicus curiae briefs. It's not a condition. So I don't think you just paint us in this idea of like, we're just enforcing this random will of judges. That's not exactly what we're doing. Their side is even worse though, because they're like, let's just let the people decide on what rights are. What is their understanding of rights if all they say is that democracy can trump this? Our fourth and final argument is an argument of precedent, completely dropped. You can extend it across the flow. I think it's good that courts should probably have a consistent view of law. They don't respond to this at all. Part of the reason why you might want to have a Supreme Court is to create a consistent body of law. No response from them. Let's go case side. So just as an overview, like a lot of Greg's responses are just like, no, yes, no. I don't think he actually engages with the meat of Trin's analysis, and it really took out a lot of their case. So their first argument was the role of the judiciary. So Trin said, you need to extend these certain rights, and he gave you a fundamental right we have. And all he says is, no, you can't just create a right that doesn't exist. It's like, well, how do they, one, attack this Ninth Amendment argument Trin gave you, and Greg didn't respond to it. But second, it's like, what is their view of privacy if they don't think of it as a right? On one hand, they say privacy is a right, but it only extends in certain circumstances. But Trin beat that argument and showed you why it should extend in our circumstances. No response from Greg whatsoever. That means that there is a fundamental right, that even if you buy their standard of when the court should intervene, that means that you have to intervene to protect this fundamental right. But moreover, Trin told you very clearly why you want to check against the will of the majority, and why their view of courts is just absurd. All he says is like, no, they're strawmanning our argument, you want to defer the Constitution. So it's like, no, when their standard for this in the round is you want to defer to the people, we've shown you a clear fundamental right. The final thing I want to talk about on this case is their third argument. They say like, no, you can't just claim this right to abortion.
So Greg says that Roe v. Wade is talking about the right to privacy and not the right to abortion. So somehow this means that Trin's arguments about how this isn't necessary and how you don't want to do this and how you need this personal structure are all wrong. We told you very clearly in response to this about medical. We're very
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There aren't very many ways government can win this round, but I want to go over what little offense they do have. So first of all, we get this argument that there's no right to privacy in the Constitution. It's interesting then that we have the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and the Ninth Amendment, which all provide direct constitutional hooks to get you a right to privacy. And recognize the standard and the argumentation they give you for why we do protect the right to privacy is absurd. It is not just to protect the government from collecting information. It is to protect the government from interfering in personal spheres of individual rights and individual people. That's why we protect this information, and that's why we extend a right to privacy. But we also told you that due to precedent that happened at the time of this case, Griswold v. Connecticut already established a right to privacy. And given that you're in the Supreme Court, you should probably follow what you just said 5 years ago. Also, they give you this argument that we should only protect enumerated rights of the Constitution. It's like, apparently, the Ninth Amendment just like floated outside of GA and went away. This is an argument for doing all sorts of crazy things. Like, this is also an argument for criminalizing sodomy. This is an argument for not protecting any unenumerated constitutional rights. Recognize, the framers put this Ninth Amendment in specifically so people like them wouldn't think that the only rights the Constitution were protected were the ones that were written down. And finally, they say that it's inappropriate to ever constrain democracy. Look, this is obviously absurd. We constrain democracy all the time to protect fundamental rights. And you know why this is actually in keeping with democratic principles? Because the people signed this document, support this document, and support this government all the time. The people want there to be a Supreme Court that's protecting their rights. But even under this absurd originalist framework, we told you that quickening happens post-viability. So you're able to use a very strict originalist lens to still get the constitutional right to abortion. So that said, I first want to ask, is there a constitutionally protected right to abortion? Before I continue with some other analysis. So we hear this argument from Greg. It's like, there's no bright line outside off, no bright line, but it's like, what is their standard? It's like, we gave you one. We gave you the standard that comes from Roe v. Wade, which is a standard you made us defend, which is viability. Maybe it's not a great one, but it's still there. And we gave you substantive argumentation for why this ought to be the standard. Look, before viability, the fetus is necessarily dependent on the woman's autonomy for survival. So if the woman does not want to support the fetus anymore, and given that we prioritize her interests over the interests of the fetus, we ought allow her to get an abortion if she wishes. But we also tell you we protect a constitutional right to abortion because there are unique undue burdens that fall only on females. What are these? Medical concerns, like the woman might die if she is pregnant. We think the state shouldn't be arbitrarily force her to get an abortion, even if she have a pregnancy, even if she might die. We also tell you, in cases of rape, it seems like her bodily autonomy and her bodily liberty are infringed on, even though she didn't consent to the risks of privacy. Greg told us their side of the house would support an absolute criminalization of abortion, even in cases of rape. This is absurd. This is obviously not what society the Supreme Court should uphold. But we also told you that women need this access to abortion to fulfill other rights in society, political, social, and employment rights, arguments that Greg never responded to. But finally, we think we could lose this round if they were able to prove that fetuses are people. Fortunately, Greg failed to do so in the MG, so don't let Taubes bring up in the PMR. We told you, we don't count fetuses in the census, we don't give them political rights, and we don't include them in the moral consensus from which we build our society. These are arguments they constantly fail to address on their side of the house. Look, we don't give fetuses rights because they have no ability to dream, to desire, or to have goals. In principle, they have no sentience. So while we might be comfortable extending some derivative rights, they're not constitutionally protected rights, like the constitutionally protected rights of women. Also, there's a huge drop on their side of the house. We told you, Mr. Speaker, all these arguments for protecting fetuses are also arguments for criminalizing contraceptives. Why? Because that is the but-for reason that could stop a life from being produced. Maybe this isn't the greatest argument in the world, but Greg sure as hell didn't respond to it, so it's true in this round. Don't let Taubes bring it up in this panel. Look, this case is very simple. We gave you a bright line. We proved a fundamental right. We're proud to oppose.
thank you very much, and we appreciate the waited, but we do call you people.
You know, this has been one of those rare rounds where I feel like opposition has talked more about my PMR than they've talked about any of the arguments that I brought up during PMC. Because I think that they talk a lot about how we don't provide a standard or how we don't have a response, where I was literally responding to like POIs 2 minutes in, and like they just never really got to it. So the first thing I want to talk about is, does this right to an abortion exist in the Constitution? And I think it's first really important to note something which they've dropped, which is that it's clear that the founders, and nowhere in the text does anything say anything about abortion, right? And so maybe we should be a little bit suspicious that this right to abortion magically, although unbeknownst to 200 years, exists in the Constitution. Now, what they say is, well, what we told you is, look, we're willing to admit that some parts of the Constitution imply that there's possibly a right to privacy. Those principles include the First Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment. But all of those principles are regarding how the government can extract information from individuals. Now, their response to this is quite literally one of the least clashing arguments I have ever heard. They get up and they say, no, the right to privacy is more expansive because we can throw the Third Amendment in there, and that can kind of be like extended as well to the right to an abortion. First of all, what we told you was, if there's any right to privacy, it exists in these 3 amendments, the First, Fourth, and Fifth. The Third Amendment, as Greg points out, seems to have very little to do with what decisions you can make in your intimate life, and a lot more to do with the fact that the British like to do this thing where they put soldiers in people's houses, right? I don't think that they were thinking to themselves, yeah, put in that Third Amendment, because in 200 years they'll think it means abortion. But then they say, look, women are really harmed by this. When women have a child, it hurts them a lot. This doesn't respond to the argument which we made, which is, yes, it hurts you a lot, but what the fuck does that have to do with privacy? It's like just your life is less good, right? And lots of laws the government has restrict what choices you can make, what rational decisions you can enter into, make your life much worse. Like, for example, laws that restrict soft drug use, laws that restrict your ability to commit suicide. They need to tell you why all of those things were constitutional rights on their side because they seriously impact your life and they restrict your choices. And they never did. But in addition, what they tell us is that they tell us this Griswold decision forces us to have this right to an abortion. And they're like, Greg never responds to it, so Alex can't respond to it. I responded to it. In my PNC, I responded to it. What we told you was, Griswold only banned outlaws on the use of contraception, which required the government to use really draconian ways of getting information, like going into your bedroom. Why is what's going on in the doctor's office not as draconian? Because the government's already doing that all the time. They admitted to on this side of the house. But the second research crystallization I want to ask is, should the Supreme Court construct new rights? Because in the op, they're just like, on your side of the house, there's no rights. And we're like, no, just not the ones that aren't in the Constitution. They're like, but no rights, you guys. What about the Ninth Amendment? Here's the problem. What we told you was, if you're trying to decide on what rights you want to construct, where do you look except to the Constitution, right? They don't actually tell you any way of determining what's fundamental in making these decisions. But additionally, what we told you was that in making decisions about what's fundamental in our democracy, we ought to defer to democracy because when the Supreme Court strikes down laws like this, not only is it exercising a great power in overruling the majoritarian will, it also prevents any majoritarian lawmaking process to check against it. And we think that's the reason why you should make these fundamental rights. They like the right to an abortion. Would they like the right to a contract? The right to employ anyone in any wage you want? At what point does their Supreme Court's ability to make new rights end, and at what point does it begin? What we told you is that the Supreme Court should only go beyond the Constitution when that fundamental principle of democracy is harmed and needs protection from the Supreme Court. And then they're like, but these laws are clearly discriminating against women, guys. Only women can have abortions. Greg tried to tell you men can have abortions. Greg never tried to tell you men can have abortions, all right? Greg can tell you a lot of things. He's never going to tell you men can have abortions. You know what he can tell you, though? The fact that this law only applies to women is just an accident because of course it only applies to women because of course women don't get abortions. And they gave you an argument, too, which is that's why racial bathrooms are bad, clearly just subordinating blacks and giving them worse bathrooms. But bathrooms for people of different sexes doesn't really seem as bad, right? Because it's a biological accident. But in addition, what we told you is that on their side of the house, even if it does discriminate against women, if we have a compelling governmental interest that weighs against it, We think that that outweighs, and what we told you was, given that there's the potentiality of life, even if it's not a human life, we don't know why this is not a compelling governmental interest that can outweigh it. But finally, I want to ask, what the hell is this constitutional right they're creating? They say, we have the viability standard. It's the only standard. Medicine told us. There was an Amalekai brief, so they made arguments, and apparently they don't have to make those arguments. But that's the standard. Here's the problem. We don't have to choose the standard. We didn't tell you the Supreme Court should intervene and give you a different standard. What we told you is, the Constitution doesn't say anything about privacy or abortion. You know what it definitely doesn't say anything about? When life begins. So you know what the Supreme Court probably should be doing? Deciding when life begins, when every religion believes that abortion should stop before then. The fetus feels pain and all this. The Constitution